Hello, I have a very fun video today because I have a special guest here in the library of Bob the Bookerer.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for joining me, Bob. I'm sure many of you are familiar with and watch Bob's videos here on YouTube. He's a Booker Prize fanatic, and but also, just reviews lots and lots of books and reads, I think, even more than I do. So if you don't follow his channel, please do. I'll put a link to it in the description below. But we are here today to discuss the Booker Prize shortlist and who we hope will win this year's prize, and also who we think will win this year's prize. So here are the 6 shortlisted books, beautifully modeled, and the winner will be announced on November 10th. So not very long now before we find out which of these novels is the new winner of the Booker Prize. And so how we're going to do this, to start off with, we are going to go through and reveal what are our preferences, our individual preferences, and to do that, I've written out the names of all the books on these cards, but we don't know what each other has written, so we're going to go through and reveal one by one what are from our least favorite to our most favorite, to see how much we match up or differ. And then we'll have a chat about that and debate about the books and discussion of all of them before having a discussion about what we think will win the prize, and if that differs from our personal preferences of who we want to win. Let's go through and reveal it, because that's the fun dramatic part. I like to have a little bit of drama at the beginning of. So to start off with, the book that we least want to win out of all of the books. Just
it feels like the Oscars.
Right. So at number 6 for both of us is Rest of Our Lives. I thought we might agree on that one.
It's one of those things, it's like, I don't necessarily think it's a bad book, and I did really enjoy reading it. I think for me,
it's when there's like a prize context and you're like, is this the best book of the year? Yeah.
I think it's always hard for like from going from long list to short list as well, because there will be a book that you love from the long list, and typically I think the long lists are a bit more divisive because they tend to be, strong flavours essentially, and the short list normally boils it down to where the judges have kind of met midway.
Consensus,
and so I think in some ways Rest of Our Lives, maybe in some people's eyes, is sort of for me, definitely that's kind of how I felt. But it was fine. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good novel. I think I just wanted a little more. I think I just wanted it to really punch home like the points it was making. Whereas for me, it sort of felt like it got to the end and then went, okay, bye, and left. So how about for you?
It's a book that kind of irritated me from the beginning, the voice of it, and so I think that really impacted, if you're immediately irritated by the narrative voice, then it's going to be a bit of a slog getting through the rest of the book. And I initially thought maybe it's because of there's a lot in it about basketball. I don't care about basketball at all. Right. But actually, I don't think that's really it, because, if you think about a couple of years ago with Chetna Maru's novel, Western Lane, which is all about the sport of squash, which I do not care about at all. But I loved that book so much, and I was rooting for it to win, because, I thought it was so great, because the way she portrays the practice of that sport and how personal that was to the main character in her process of grief and her family dynamics, and just kind of a way of navigating through her early life, her adolescence and teenage years, and so whereas this and the basketball, it just sort of felt like, well, I'm a fan of basketball, hey, do you want to go shoot some hoops? And that's and I know, and I'm not trying to detract from lots of people love sports. I know it's it's an important thing for a lot of people. I'm not totally dumping on sports, but it's to read about it so much, and also there was just so much what felt like kind of unnecessary details, or just so many casual observations that just didn't feel like, I know it's giving a larger sense of his life as a whole, but But if you think about it in comparisons to novel like Love Forms by
Yes,
Claire Adam, which was on the long list, which also had a lot of just kind of random details in it about her life, but it felt so much more emotionally impactful for me because she was self-consciously building up this picture of her life as a way to explain to a daughter that she has never known who she is, but I think also trying to articulate to herself who she was. So I found it impactful in that case. But in Ben Markovits' book, it just sort of felt like I need to know that you had to get off the second exit on the highway to get to the Holiday Inn. And all of these little details, which I know are just sort of aspects of his life, and it did feel like a very realistic portrayal. I know there's lots of men out there like that, and I think I'm partly like a man like that. I can just like go on about things that people don't care about, but yeah, being forced to read a whole novel like that is and it is saying larger things about people who are sort of like in the middle politically in America and the consequences of that, and really like exploring that on a personal level. But I didn't feel that impacted or changed by it or
I think that's for me. It kind of felt like it sort of set up a fair few things early on, and I felt like I didn't get either the emotional payoff of like the big things within the family, and I didn't really get like the literary payoff. And so sort of as a result, the book kind of ended, and I was like, okay, cool. So I think that's kind of. Whereas it's interesting because when I was reading it, I was trying to think like normally I'm quite happy with books where, in theory, not a great deal happens, sort of like an Anne Tyler or an Elizabeth Strout novel where it's kind of there's a purpose to the everyday. There's a sort of the everydayness of the characters is celebrated, and that's really impactful and it has an emotional weight. And in some ways, it kind of felt caught for me between it had some aspects of the everyday. It felt like it was going to be a sort of road trip novel that took in the expanse of the US. And then in some ways, it felt like that was an intentional point of the author to also be he's going to do this big tour of the US and he goes across about 3 towns and then stops. And in some ways I'm like, that is maybe the point in the book. And I loved some aspect of that and thought that was really funny. But then I think I kind of got to the end and I was like, okay, cool. Like I wanted more in a sort of bad way, where I think sometimes a novel really, you've had a really good fill of something and then the novel still wants you leaving more. And for me with this, I just felt like I was just missing an extra couple of chapters or something that would have just tipped it. So it's one of those hard things I think with this where I feel like I don't hate it as a book. And so it's a good position to be in where your number 6 is not a book you hate. I think the sea scraper effect was very real in this as well, which is any book that made it that people weren't expecting would always feel tricky when there was a book that lots of people loved.
Yeah, and that really wanted to be on the shortlist. I could see the judges making an argument that it should win, but personally, I don't think so. Shall we reveal number 5?
Number 5, yes.
Okay, I was kind of surprised. I'm going through and making this order that it wasn't initially like how I thought I would go, but also in the few days leading up to this, I've gone and reread both the beginning and final chapters of each of the novels. Rereading them all in their entirety would be quite a lot, but yeah, just to kind of like brush up on my sense of the books. And then actually it made me think with the Ben Markovits books, I don't know if anyone has said this before or if it's been commented before, but it made me feel like that it's like a modern play on the Odyssey because of just the whole like leaving his wife and then like coming back to her.
Oh my gosh,
so like, and that just seemed like a very strong thing about it. And by the way, as we are discussing the books, I think we'll inevitably be talking about some spoilers in case you haven't read them yet, just because in order to like fully discuss the books in their entirety, I think it'll be important to talk about some aspects of the later parts of the book, but I will put in chapters in here. So if you haven't read one of these books that you still want to get to and don't want anything spoiled, then you can skip on ahead. Anyway, number 5.
Number 5. I feel like this is now like a time moment where I'm like, there are only 5. I have only 5 envelopes left. But for me, number 5
is Flashlight. Okay, I said The Land in Winter.
Fair. This is the tricky part for me because essentially the top 4 there is very little in it for me between each of these 4. So this is like 5th by not by accident, but kind of by process of elimination. So actually, I don't dislike this book. I think this is a very good book, but it's more just that top four is really solid for me, and this is just sort of like a nudge beneath that. Not in a bad way. I think it's still a very good book. Yeah, why Land in Winter for you?
Well, this was the book that was like most distant in my mind because I'd read it last December, and so going back and rereading the beginning and end of it now, maybe that's not a fair way to read this book because it feels almost like quite random. The very beginning of the book takes place in a mental institution when a man who's committed suicide is discovered, and that is kind of mostly like separate from the main plot and point of the novel, but casts this kind of like sinister edge and feeling over to the rest of the book, whereas then it ends up with like quite a dramatic moment, but also it just feels like the story just finishes in a way which is fairly abrupt, and it's a book that I think is incredibly beautifully written. So like in terms of like the prose and stuff, I'm enjoying the reading experience. Definitely like would rate more highly over Ben Markovits' book. But even though I really enjoyed and appreciated it and can pick out aspects of it that I think are really interesting and good, it's in comparison to the other books, I sort of feel like at the end of it, like, well, what is the point? Like, what is it trying to like say overall? Not that I think a novel necessarily has to be making this like big overall point or message that it's giving. But I think maybe like if I reread it in its entirety, I would appreciate it a lot more. But
fair. Yeah, no, I get that. I think because I really loved it, but I also think it's interesting. I found that when I was doing this, and spoilers to my envelope in a couple of times, but for me, Land in Winter was one of those books where immediately after I read it, I thought this was really sublime and so beautifully done. And I found that some of the other books from the shortlist have lingered slightly more in my mind. And maybe the Land in Winter, because it is so sort of subtle at times, or so sort of quiet, that maybe parts of that haven't wormed their way into my head in quite the same way. There aren't as many, I suppose, big dramatic moments in some ways that kind of have lodged their way into my head. But I mean, I think, it is. I thought it had a real beauty and emotional weight to it personally. But I get why it would be there. I think it's one of those ones I've seen quite a few people when they've read it or spoken about it having kind of odd mixed feelings about it. Where actually, I think for me, this was a book that I intellectually loved almost, and then at times did have some sort of emotional attachment to it. But then I haven't kind of kept in that same thing since. I thought it did some really interesting things about the idea of sort of echoes of violence or of war. So particularly, I think there is a character who has changed his name, I think, or everyone's sort of living with the aftermath of World War II, and particularly things around concentration camps. And so there are a few references of how could this be the case 15 years after Belsen or something. You know, a few people throw out lines like that where there's this idea of this horrific thing has happened and the generation after is raised with a sort of post-war mentality and everything is new and exciting and there's a boom, or a very difficult time for most of the characters in this book, but there's a sort of a promise of a boom coming. And that, I thought that was really beautifully done as sort of a very subtle piece of historical fiction. Sorry, I'm just going on a bit of a ramble here, but sometimes I think with some historical fiction novels, sometimes the thing that sort of rankles is that characters are very aware of the time period they're living in. Whereas actually, to some degree, we live through time in a weird way. Like, we'll probably look back and think of ourselves as being in a time now that is post-lockdown, the Trump years, or, you know, whatever else, in a way that feels maybe more historically significant when we look back differently. And actually, when we live it, it's just a set of things happening in the news. And so I really liked that about The Land in Winter, that there was this sense of the characters were sort of living and people around them are trying to instruct them on how politically or historically significant the world is. So sort of, don't you know that Bergen-Belsen was so short a time ago, and the characters are like, I'm doing this and I'm thinking about my divorce. And, you know, they've got other things on their minds that aren't the shadow of war
immediately in their lives. And I did really like how it put in sort of small things in the background of capturing this moment of time and state of like transition, like towards the end of the book. There's this observation because of all the massive snowfall.
Yes.
They can't travel to the end of their roads,
Yes.
but they can still make calls to America. And
Right.
so and this sense of like, oh, how where we can be so connected to the larger world in a way, but then with our immediate environment, we're kind of like cut off from it, and that feels like something that has like been amplified and like increased like in recent years as you know, people are just sort of online but then, you know, don't know their neighbors or talk to their neighbors or can't speak or physically interact with people in person, or find that a lot more difficult. And so they'd I liked how there would be small references in it too that kind of give a larger meaning in our present time, even though this is set in the 60s. And I am now eager, because this is the first book I've read by Andrew Miller, so I'm eager now to like go back and read his other fiction, because I do think he's an incredibly good writer. Just can construct such a beautiful sentence and create like such a sense of atmosphere, and and it seems like he really picks out really interesting historical like moments and stuff, because I think quite a lot of his novels historical moments.
From the ones I've read, the ones and the other ones I've sort of heard about. I've been doing a sort of separate side project where for the last few years, where I try and read another book by the shortlisted authors. And I read Oxygen by him recently, which was also shortlisted in the past. And very different type of book in some ways, but has that same sort of subtle attention to detail that I really respected.
In a very small detail, this already like won a big historical fiction prize this year, and so, which I know should not be a consideration at all, but I'm not a judge, so I can have these like oh, give somebody else a chance. That sort of mentality. So number 4 on
this is the right way around.
our list.
Yeah,
I have to be careful to pick the right one. I would put in 4th place Audition.
I've got The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny, but again, this is like a top 4 that is like a hair's breadth between all 4. And I kept on swapping these envelopes around. At one point, Eric went to another room, and I sort of like shifted these envelopes about 4 more times, being like, so I might not even agree with my top 4 by the time we get to the end. But yes.
I realize this also feels like traders now too.
Well, you have to
Kitamura.
You have to misspell
I picked yourself now. We should misspell it.
Like Katie with 4 eyes. My Audition.
Well, Audition is. I really appreciate going back and reading, reading the beginning and end of this book. Made me want to go back and read the entire thing again, because it's so fascinating how it can just be interpreted in so many different ways, and the way she kind of meditates on personality and self-consciousness, and the degree to which we are kind of influencing and manipulating the like social interactions around us, and how much about those interactions do we not actually understand ourselves. And it feels like it explores the tension of that in such an interesting way, but at the same time it also, like, I can't like quite get over that thing of like, oh, it's just a kind of mental like exercise, rather than you can really feel an emotional involvement in this book, whereas it gives me lots of interesting things to think about. And also I felt like the ending of the book like is a bit weak, and it goes a bit wonky, and becomes a bit absurd, and felt a bit forced to me. And I would say with like all of these novels that there are probably aspects of all of them that I have issues with.
Right.
I don't think like any of them is like, oh, this is a perfect novel that should absolutely win the prize. I think particularly with Audition. So but why would you put Kiran Desai, former Booker winner?
I know, swapped this around, because at one point this was like number 2 or number 3. It's much of a muchness with this top 4, because I think for me there are like kind of, I think like you were saying, there are so many things that these books I think do really exceptionally, and then other things where I'm sort of on the fence about it. And I think Sonia and Sunny I thought was so beautiful in a lot of ways. I really loved the way that the book brings up, there's always this kind of inevitable 9/11 reference with any book set in the US as you get into the early 2000s. But I thought the book did some really interesting things of playing around and subverting ideas that kind of feel like they mirror Kiran Desai's own life to some degree. This book comes, I think, 17 years since her last book. And then in the book, this is a 20-year story. And there are all these references that almost feel like they are intentional nods to Kiran Desai's own life in a way that I think gets really odd and meta. And I don't know if I'm overreading this, but the thing I keep on talking about that I just really loved about it is quite early on, I can't remember the horrible man's name, is it Ilan or something?
Yeah.
He basically says to Sonia, I was about to ask what her name was, I'm like, it's in the title block. Sonia is worried about writing, and particularly Ilan says to her, well, you have to avoid sort of orientalizing yourself and writing about like peacocks and mangoes and kind of a traditional or stereotypical view of India. But then she's caught in this bind because she wants to write about India because that feels like home and that's a connection when she's away in the US. But then to write a novel about a sort of immigrant experience to the US or kind of sort of foreign implant in the US thing feels like another kind of stereotype or another cliche. And so she's kind of caught in this bind that I think almost mirrors Kiran Desai's own writing, because her first two books are very much set in and around India and play on a lot of themes around Indian life. And this book is very marked and different as a book that is largely in the US with a fair bit of India in parts. And so I almost felt that there was a really intelligent point going on here as well about the impossibility of what that is for writers from outside the global north, really, to have to write to entertain in a specific way of like, I am an Afghan writer and I need to write a certain degree of Afghan stuff for this book to sell, but then in doing so I am prevented from writing these other things over here, and almost there's something going on there that I think is really interesting. So I really love it. I think this book on a sort of heart level and an intellectual level, I don't know why I've put this number 4 now. I want to think about this. I might bump this up.
Like you absolutely loved it.
I did. That's the thing I kind of like trip over when I think about this is like I really kind of, as a reading experience, I really enjoyed it. As a sort of literary experience, I thought there was a lot going on as well. And I think the length, for like a 600 and something page book, I thought it was surprisingly quick. And
I did too.
So this is technically number 4. Who knows? Maybe number 1 to 4. It's in that range. But I thought, there was a lot in it that I really, really loved. And I wonder for me if some of the other books, it was just that there was a kind of more of a punchiness to get to that. But I still think this is a really great novel. I wouldn't be surprised if she won again. I think it's a really strong novel.
I think it's hard sometimes with really long novels not to rate it higher because you spent so much time with that book, and I think it is like really impressive what she's done, and sometimes I find like my natural instinct as a reader is like, well, I don't want it to feel like I've just like wasted like 2 or 3 weeks reading this enormous book, and so will naturally like be more favorable about it, but I found the same thing, that most of it was very readable, and I was really engaged all the way through. But I did have issues with it. The whole thing about the amulet and trying to retrieve the amulet, and it becomes this mission quest, which again, like I think Kiran Desai was probably doing some kind of like metafictional thing in putting this like plot line into it. But it felt a bit silly to me, and also with aspects of Ilan, I was wishing at the beginning like oh, she's left him, like we can now leave him behind, but no. He comes back, and she encounters him again in quite a coincidental way, as they're like on holiday in Italy, and he just happens to be there giving a lecture, and so I had like issues with it like on those levels, but in the majority of the book, so weirdly I'm sounding more critical of it than you, even though I've obviously rated it higher in our grouping. But in the majority of the book, like I love Pepita too as like a really difficult character, and that is so pleasurable to read about, because she's just so vocal in her opinions, and I think represents like a really interesting different position from either Sonia or Sunny, in that when she goes out and travels in the world, like she actively like doesn't want to, she feels offended if there are other Indian people there, and so has this different kind of self-consciousness going out into the world than either Sonia or Sunny does, and has lots of prejudiced attitudes which she's very vocal about, and doesn't feel any issue with expressing. Shall we go to number 3?
Yes.
In our list.
No, I mean, I may regret all of this top 4 now. As I said, there's like a hair's breadth between the top 4 for me.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, no, I've got this the wrong way around. There we go, that's the one.
Yeah, well, for 3, me would be Loneliness of Sonia.
And The Land in Winter for me. And again, this is like this close.
Yeah, I feel like when I first read the book, I thought like of Loneliness and Sonia, I thought, oh well, she's gonna win again and be like a second winner. But then like the more I've thought about it and kind of picked it apart, like the more issues I've had with it. But then but in a way, I feel like it's out of all the books, it's one of the most literary. Like often with like Booker Prize, people want like innovative like form or innovative. People always like pick on how I say innovative.
I used to work with someone who said innovative, and that drove me nuts.
Wow, no.
Yeah, no. I think we can all agree that's not the pronunciation.
No. That's just plain wrong. And so like a story level and with the characters and the dynamics of the family, I found it so entertaining. But then there are all these things in the background of all the issues that you've been talking about. And I'm really glad that you brought up the whole 9/11 aspect of it, because which you talked about in your video before, and I really appreciated, because when I first read the book, I thought like, oh, it feels like she's just throwing in 9/11 because the characters are living through that, and you have to mention that if you're going through this like particular historical moment. But I really like how you talked about the interesting way that she approaches that historical moment in the book. So I think there's so many good things about this book, but it's been interesting too, because I know you read this before publication, as well as I did, and so now when it's only just been published out in the world recently, and seeing so many different opinions about it, where I've seen some readers who absolutely love this book and think it's one of the greatest that they've read in some time, and others who really hate it and put it aside and DNF'd it. Land in Winter is
and again, that was like hairs particularly 2, 3 and 4. Like for me, I could swap any of that around and I'd be happy. It was more just for me, this is only number 3 for a while. This is my number 2. It swapped around, and it was mostly just because I think, kind of like I was saying earlier, I think that there's parts of it have sort of faded a little bit from memory, and whereas some of the other books have kind of stuck with me in a stronger way. But I still thought there was so much beauty going on in this that it was a really just accomplished novel, I thought. Almost a novel that knows it's a novel, which sounds like a really stupid thing to say, but I have this a lot with films, where I really enjoy films that know that they're a film and play with the form of being that. And although this is a slightly more conventional novel in kind of terms of historical fiction, there's something about this that felt very, the hush of the language. Something felt really like it. Everything mapped and mirrored to each other. So the kind of there's like a hush to the language during the winter moments that felt very much like the language, like form and function were working together, and that's what I thought was just really special about it.
That's really interesting.
There you go.
Number 2, which I think is I know will be now, but mine would be Flashlight.
Mine is Audition, and again, Audition has been between 2 and 4 constantly, but it's somewhere in that mix. Yeah, for me, I think I agree. I go back and forward on this, because some part of me wonders, kind of like some of my issues with The Rest of Our Lives, is there the payoff for the reader? Like, is this a book that does not care about the reader? Because in some ways the book holds you off from knowing the truth.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like she's just having her own little game.
Yeah. She's sort of playing around, and we're just
observing.
We're just there. Yeah. And so some part of me feels really odd about the book for that reason, and that's why it's kind of constantly gone between like 2, 3, 4. But there was something about the narrative voice of this that I just completely loved, that just gripped me right from the beginning. Of it's so confident and sure in its point of view that it kind of just goes for it. And it just felt incredibly confident as a novel, and just the ways that there was a podcast about this that I was listening to, and it was interesting because there were 4 people, I think 3 or 4 people discussing the book. Nobody agreed on what it was about. And in some ways that could be seen as a mark of a bad novel. But I thought there was something quite fun about that.
Yeah.
Just sort of
definitely. I think so too.
like there are multiple readings in this. And actually, obviously when we talk about what we think the judges will go for, I think there is something really special in the sense that this is a book that I think on each reread will give you something entirely different. Because I have a very specific idea of what I think it all means at the end. But then I change my mind on that occasionally. And also every time I've heard somebody else with a contrasting theory, I'm like, oh yeah, actually no, I agree. That's also true. And so in some ways that's quite fun. But yeah, I just loved the narrative voice of this. I thought it was really just so confident and daring. I have seen people comment, and I'm also inclined to agree in some ways that there is some way where like, is this more gimmick than novel? There's almost like a missing third act. And in some ways, I love the fact that the third act isn't there. But also sometimes I kind of want that third act to clarify things. But I guess that's the point. So yeah. I just tie myself in knots with this book, basically.
Well, and I thought, I kind of felt like I was impacted because I then went and read interviews with her, and she says quite clearly, like, oh no, there's no one way to read this novel. And so
that's good.
It's like, well, then, so if there's, then does all this like speculation, does it even really matter? But then, with all books, I guess it's just whatever the reader wants to take from it, and it's not only with each rereading do you have a different perspective, but it's that your interpretation of it will depend on where you are in your life and what's happening in your life, and goes to really show of how much we as readers put into the books that we are reading, that it's so much about our own experience, and that how that impacts our interpretation of it. And and in honor of this of Audition, we've got some pastries which we won't eat on camera, but I just got for us to enjoy after we have our long discussion about these books. So and I take back slightly what I said. I think probably Audition is the most self-consciously literary novel on the list because of that, because it's all about the structure and how things have been placed and what information is revealed, and to that adds to the interpretation. It's not just like a recitation of events or scenes that you're like, okay, I know what happened. But I've found with Flashlight. I keep not wanting to do. I've managed not to do that the entire time I've been, because there's a novel called Flesh and there's a novel called Flashlight, and I won't explain what Flashlight is for anyone who doesn't happen to know, but I wouldn't suggest googling it.
No,
if you
particularly not on a work computer.
Anyway. Flashlight is it's a book that's really gone up in my estimation the more time that has gone by, where it's so much about has really lingered with me, and that I've been thinking about and mulling over. And part of my reason of loving this book so much is that it so completely embraces the honorary characters that the very spiky characters that it portrays. The three central characters of this family in the book, they're not easy people to get along with.
No.
But I think over the course of the book, I really get to understand why they have. I think each of them individually has been kind of stripped of their agency. There are aspects of their lives which they really can't control, whether that is to do with being born in a place where it's so like ambivalent what your nationality is, and being tied to a totalitarian nation, or having a physical disability which you can't control, and like chronic illness and chronic pain that of having to deal with that in your life, or being born in a family that has all of these issues which you're not told about. It's not explained to you what has happened, so you're so in the dark about your heritage in life and why things are the way that they are, and acting out because of that, and so following the girl Louisa at the center of the story, and the heartbreak of then like following her as when she's goes to college, and she decides like oh, I'm gonna have a trip to Europe, I'm gonna go to Europe and have this time there, and the how that goes horribly wrong for her, and that whole section just felt so painfully realistic to me, of like a young person like just going out and wanting
Right.
to find her way in the world and have a good time, and coming up against all of these obstacles, and but also how there's like these layers of the personal meaning and impact for all these characters of these events, and then it works up to these larger political and like social issues that all of them are caught within, and how it portrays these larger events from history and about the worlds that I wasn't aware of before, and yeah, so this is a book that just is really like built up in my estimation over time, and also going back and reading the beginning and ending of this book, it felt so emotionally impactful from where she begins in this kind of psychiatrist office, not wanting to sort of give anything away and being quite difficult, and then at the end with her father, it just it's really touching at the end. So that's why I think so highly of this book. And even though like it's kind of it's a strange book in some ways, because there's just so much that happens in it, which feels like it's kind of like cobbled together, but that's kind of necessary as a portrayal of this family, because their lives are come from all these different have all these different aspects to them, which don't really neatly fit together. So you can't just like tell a story of this family's development and their connection over time, because they've been so splintered apart by these larger events. And so so that's why I think it's one of the strongest books on the list, and is potential winner.
Nice. You're making me like it more. I mean, I still liked it, don't get me wrong, but like I suppose I hadn't necessarily, because for me part of it felt a bit disjointed, but actually as you're talking I was thinking, actually that is kind of like I was saying with The Land in Winter, where actually we don't live life in this very novel story-like way. We kind of just live life, and then we later retrofit a narrative that kind of connects these like dots, really. And actually, I suppose that's kind of the thing with that. I thought there was such emotional weight to this. So actually, kind of some of my issues with The Rest of Our Lives, I think this book does something really beautifully with, which is there are so many stories going on, and we get a real richness of how somebody's very traumatic experiences in a prisoner of war camp or in a kind of thing like that many years ago might completely show up in the way that they treat their children or kind of their wider family or what have you, in a way that is kind of imperceptible. Like it's not, they're not quoting having been in that camp as the reason that they're doing it. They just do, and they've kind of learned patterns, or they've learned ways of survival. And I found particularly, is it Cirque? I thought there's something so beautiful about the way he appears in the text, in terms of like so much makes sense. This idea of sort of family, not quite epigenetics, but this idea of like the things you pass on to a family. And so right at the beginning of the book, we're kind of concerned with this idea of Koreanness and being Korean in a non-Korean environment, and having to work out what that means to sort of claim an identity, but it's also a hated identity, or kind of a distrusted identity where you are, and kind of how you sort of internalize that. And then I thought all of the kind of threads that connect it, I thought them were really interesting, of completely sort of parts of history I hadn't really thought of. So again, without spoilers, but the father in this prisoner of war camp having to find a way of survival that might mean that he is perceived as the enemy when he returns, which I thought was so emotionally impactful. And then the knock-on effect that has through the family of a really complicated sense of how you feel part of something. So, is your sense of Koreanness just done through rituals? Is it done through like the traditions, rituals, all those sorts of day-to-day things? Is it done by language? Is it done by blood? How do you connect yourself to that sense of identity? And particularly I think it is Louisa. Is it Louisa?
Yeah, it is.
When sort of the idea of at school, of kind of how you kind of connect to a sense of who you are, when you know that you're definitely not what everybody else is, essentially, and kind of like your identity being just other. So I thought the book played around with that really interestingly, and I thought as a sort of family epic was really interesting as well. I think for me, I occasionally sort of felt like it was a bit overlong, but then I also, at the same time as saying that, I did really love how much was in this. So probably I kind of can't really like have my cake and eat it here, but I kind of thought there was something so beautiful about so much of it. But and like I said, it was just like the sort of my like top one 2 to 4 and then 5, like just behind it for me personally. Like I still thought this was a great novel. Yeah, and I think when I saw it on the long list, I didn't necessarily think it would be shortlisted, but then looking at the shortlist as a whole, it actually makes a lot of sense. I think it feels in some ways a bit like a bridge novel between some of the other ones here. This is probably a novel with the most sort of feeling and family sort of epic story, kind of like Sonia and Sunny, and like it has sort of these little literary elements I thought were interesting too.
Yeah, as I was rereading them, it really struck me how the different ways that Sonia and Sunny and Flashlight approach family dynamics is really compelling. So that means
mystery number 1,
joint number 1, Flesh.
There we go. I love this book. I read it before the announcement, and so sometimes I do wonder with this whether parts of this are coloured by this, where the books I read before the announcement, do I treat them differently because I just got to experience them as they were rather than up against a metric of a book prize or whatever. But I just think this is so strong as a novel. I love the way that the narrator intentionally doesn't want to tell you the story, that a chapter will, between chapters, 4 or 5 years have passed and like multiple huge life moments have happened, and the book just is okay with that. And there's a confidence to this book of how you sustain a really clipped, reserved communication style for 200 odd pages and make it entertaining. I get why
emotional.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get why people don't like this book. I get why it puts a few people off. I was really surprised by how emotional I found parts of this, given that the narrator, Istvan, does not want to tell you anything.
Yeah.
And in some ways
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Like something major happens and he sort of just goes back to work. You're like, okay, all right, cool. But I thought there was something so clever going on here, because just the way that Istvan's early moments, which are all about him accidentally having been too vulnerable, or in his mind showing too much emotion, or being too carried away and being sort of not being methodical enough, not being careful enough. And he overcorrects for the rest of this book, where he is doing anything and everything to just stay within a fixed lane. And that's what I thought was so beautifully done about this, that like he can, without there's so many things I almost want to spoil, but like
you can spoil, because
huge moments will happen. Like a child will be born and we'll just find out a couple of pages later that there's a son. And we're just sort of like, okay, that feels like it should be quite a big moment in your life. But there's something so confident about this. And I don't know if you've read any other books by David Szalay.
I read the other one that was listed for the book, All That Man Is.
Yes, yeah. And I love the way that he interrogates masculinity in this book in a way that doesn't feel, because I think it's quite easy to do that in a book and it come across that we just laugh at masculinity or we kind of treat it in a certain way, whereas I think in this book there's we're more allowed to see it as something like a suffocating blanket that's over Istvan's life, that maybe there are moments he'd want to share with us but he doesn't feel like he can, or maybe there are things that he would want to reveal in the book, but his sense of sort of male identity or masculine identity is about shutting off everything. He goes to work, he does the thing, he compiles money that he then maybe spends on a more frivolous thing, but it's very contained and I feel like I know men like him.
Yeah, definitely.
And I felt very real, and there's something of a gut punch because of how reserved and removed he is almost from his own life.
Yeah. And I love how it maintains an ambiguity about the reasons for why he is this way and why masculinity works in this way. Is it about innate desires which a man can't really control or that just sort of well up in him, or is it kind of like social expectations about how he should conduct himself and what's expected of him, and the gradual way that it builds up a portrait of his life and his development, and I could see how some readers might not feel like he doesn't really develop or grow or change in ways, but I think he does quite a lot in like subtle ways, and especially going back and reading the beginning and end of this book, where like in the beginning he's so nervous and like closed off from the world and is hesitant about but he does because he's an adolescent, has all these burgeoning like sexual desires which he kind of can't control like once they are like unleashed, and how that impacts him so much, and he's not able to really like explain or he doesn't really understand what all of that is. But then I think towards the end of the book he really does build up more of an understanding of this when he has an affair with a woman towards the end of the book, and he opens up starts opening up a lot more. He actively asks her questions about her life, and that's also such an interesting way, I thought, of, rather than I mean, it is the whole book is centered around him, but then we get this brief glimpse towards the end of the book of a woman who has also had like quite a difficult life, and we get small like insights into the challenges she has faced, and how this has impacted her her life and her relationships, and I just I thought with you, I can totally understand why people would be frustrated by this book, or be like wait, why is this so meaningful? But I just thought it was so subtle and beautiful, and it's so skillful to be able to use language like that in such a minimalist way, and I keep comparing this and thinking about this in relation to like Cormac McCarthy, and how his like portrayal of masculinity, and how he uses dialogue that can be so stripped down, but then feel like that there are all these emotions and feelings we can understand welling beneath that, which can't be expressed because so many people aren't able to find the language to talk about this openly, either like to each other or even to themselves, and that is just all kind of working in the background behind what is happening in their lives. And he's not in any way like a virtuous character. He makes a lot of mistakes. He makes bad decisions, but that as a kind of complex portrayal of a sense of masculinity in the world today, like I really appreciate it. It's something that is really different from most other books that I've read, that I think makes it so distinct, and why it would be my personal winner.
I think that's the thing, like kind of given what we were sort of saying with some of the books, this in some ways feels like it has such a it's literary kind of quality to it, but kind of a really writerly quality, as in like I feel like David Szalay is enjoying constructing this, and there's a very intentional construction to make this work, whilst also having this really strong emotional core. And I think so I kind of, in some ways, like I sort of feel like Flashlight is in some ways a bit of a bridge novel on this list. In some ways Flesh is for me, where it feels like a book that is very writerly, but also it wants, as much as it seems to be pushing the reader away, it also does want to draw them in and tell a story. And I think it's kind of a book that almost asks you to kind of put some assumptions to one side for what a book might do or be, and sort of to let you in. And that's why I think it's just so brilliant.
Yeah, and like you said, with like the gaps in between the scenes, and at first I found that quite abrupt, and then be like, wait, but what happened in those years
you're married now.
in between?
Okay.
But then I almost started to appreciate and like look forward to like, oh, where is he suddenly going to be next? And then it's almost becomes this slight like puzzle of like working out and trying to figure out what happened in the time in between, and how that might have impacted him and his characters and his relationships in those intervening times, which we don't see. It's I find it like interesting to think like if he had written all of those scenes in between, and this had been like 800-900 page novel, would it not have worked in that way? And I'm not sure it would have, because I think maybe it would have felt like it was like over explaining or something in that way. But so I think his like choice to kind of skip forward in this way in these scenes, which again, like with All That Men Is, like I think almost makes it more like a book of short stories, because you could probably take any of these chapters and it would almost work as a a standalone short story, but of course together it builds up a larger picture of his life. And it's an interesting thing, like to comparing it with like Flashlight, whereas the opening chapter of that was actually a short story that was published separately, and now she's like built a novel around it. And I haven't seen any interviews with her if like she'd just wrote that short story and put it aside, but then thought like, oh, there's more to this that I want to write it, or if it was always the plan that she was going to write a novel or not. Yeah. So those are our personal choices and our ordering of what we would like to see win. But what actually will win? Ooh. Look into our crystal balls and try to understand, which I think you would have to, because there's no way I think you can like logically go through and say like, oh, they're obviously going to pick this book.
Yeah, like 2 points. Add 2 points for this thing, minus 1 point for this thing. It's an impossible thing. I think every year I try and get myself inside the heads of the judges, but then I didn't read the initial 150 books, so I don't know what they whittle down for whatever reason or whatever criteria. I think they've sort of in recent years, I think, stepped away from sort of specifically talking about them having to be literary novels, but talking about fiction. I think fiction at its finest, isn't it? And the idea of like, what book in this would you press into the hands of a friend? Yeah. And actually with that in mind, that both makes a little bit more sense for the shortlist perhaps, but also makes my sort of thoughts on who I think might win slightly different. So yeah, I go between it, but in my mind I have a top three who I think it's between. I'm almost definitely going to be wrong on this. It's going to be. I've said this the last few years and been like categorically wrong on every way. But yeah, I think. Should I say my top three? Yeah. So I think personally, it's between Flesh, Audition, and Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. And I think just based on the criteria of like what book would you put into someone's hand, and also the fact that the judges would have reread these books a fair bit. Yeah. And I think all three of it, not to say the other books won't reveal new things with rereads, but I think Audition has that quality of being so, by the time that the winner is announced, they would have read it 3 times. And I wonder if on the third time they're like, actually, I've had 3 different reading experiences. Yeah. And actually that is interesting and like sparks debate and could be a really interesting one for a book club, because a book club would love getting their teeth stuck into this one. My local book club, I think, there would be arguments, there'd be fisticuffs, there'd be someone thrown out of a window.
I did read it with my book club, and we had a quite polite discussion about it, but everyone did have very different opinions about it. And I agree that like it's one that not only want to press into somebody else's hand, but want to press into their hand so that you can then have a discussion with them about it to see if they felt similarly to you or differently or not. Yeah. Yeah. And with the whole rereading thing too, like I know some readers have kind of like balked at that of saying, because since that you have to reread a book like 3 times in order to like really get it. I mean, that's quite a big demand on any reader, like especially for a book that's 670 pages long. But at the same time, I guess when like Booker judges are looking for books that would hopefully like stand the test of time, and if you think of a book that is like a contemporary classic, is one that you hope that like in 100 or 200 years time people will still be reading and rereading and like debating about, and that can spark so many different discussions. So like I think it is like valid for judges of the prize to be basing what they think should win on rereadings, but then at the same time I get for readers that are just like following the prize casually and will have been dedicated enough to read all the books then to read them all again is like a really big ask. But I think also it's, which I don't know if this is good criteria to think of it on, but thinking about recent winners of like Orbital and Paul Lynch's
Prophet
Song, that these are books that are personal and intimate stories, but also have like bigger, like really like bigger kind of like political and like social meanings to them. And of course this year, as with every year, that's an entirely different set of judges, so they might have their own like set of criteria, but I feel like that is something that the Booker usually goes for, that they want a book to have like a bigger political impact, which makes me think that Flashlight has more of a chance of like possibly winning the prize, because that, like, I think more than most of the books, I mean, maybe Kiran Desai's book as well, but yeah, that has these kind of bigger. But yeah, I could see how they would also make that argument for like Ben Markovits, and so it's maybe a bit spurious to try to like.
No, I think you make a good point, because I think there was something last year about Orbital, and actually with Prophet Song, thinking about it as well, where there is a global point being made as well, right? So like at a time when the world felt incredibly divided around the time of the announcement of the winner, Orbital is a book that was kind of about stepping out of Earth and looking down on it and kind of realizing how much folly there is in like these sort of wars and whatever between us, because from space this is just a little floating rock. And Prophet Song equally, this kind of thing around like this totalitarian or kind of oppressive force. And so actually, I hadn't really thought about it on that end, but you know, I suppose Flashlight really engages with totalitarianism at one point, and particularly sort of the echoes of that, which I think is probably quite prescient and quite important for where we are now. So yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the thing, right? If a book's made the shortlist, it has a chance of winning. You wouldn't shortlist something unless you thought it was a valid winner, potentially. I wonder, because Flesh in some ways, it plays around with. Sometimes I wonder whether it'll sort of fall at the final hurdle because of that, because there's less of a direct big world feel to it. It's a very focused thing, but particularly on maleness and masculinity and what that means. But I also, I do wonder, because does that also fall down on the metric, I suppose, of putting it to someone's hand, of being like, hey, here's a book where the main character basically says nothing and like skips over important parts of his life and seems to not want to trust you with his story. And like, I get that that's maybe a hard sell. And so that's partly why in my mind, I wonder if The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny is like a really good middle ground of all of that. Like it's a really beautiful epic that has this really beautiful story to it. It engages with the US at the current moment. It engages with the US, but that's particularly important given the current moment. It engages with sort of the world in another way. It has this sort of fun and silliness of like the characters that you were talking about, and something really beautiful and a love story ultimately. But it's also a book that has something to say. So that's why I think in my mind, I would really not be surprised to see it win. I go around with where those top three might be and where I think they might be. And actually, the more I think about it, I think The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny is maybe the most likely in that sense. I can imagine a group of judges rallying behind that more than something like Audition, that's maybe a lot more divisive or involves a lot more discussion potentially. But yeah, I also have been wrong entirely every time. I was basically fairly sure that Prophet Song wasn't going to take it. So there we go. So likewise with Orbital, I liked it, but I didn't think I necessarily thought of it in that sense. So yeah, I'm just going to, why not just say that Demon Copperhead will win this year? There we go.
Justice for Robert Kingsolver.
I'm probably more right by saying that than any of my other guesses.
Yeah, it's so difficult to tell, and really impossible to predict. And I'm sure that the judges, when I was trying to get little pieces of like listen to when there was the shortlist announcement and all the judges were discussing the books and giving their own, each one gave a presentation of each of the books, and trying to see if I could, in the way that they were talking about it, if they were leaning to one over another. I don't think I think they kept quite good poker faces and were not preferring, just speaking about their individual passions for each of the books in the moment and how they could read it in a different way. But and although with the Land in Winter, I mean, I think. They talked about how that was like one of the first books that they all read together, and that it made like such a big impact. And I wonder if if it's stayed with them that much over the course of a year, then would that mean that is more likely to win? And there's also a sense too of like I think it'd be really exciting in a way if Kiran Desai won for the second time, but then there's that part of me too that is like oh, but she's won before, and so that it could almost feel like it's like Andrew Miller's time, since he's been nominated for. He's like he's such a respected British novelist that's published quite a few books, but then of course that should not at all be a factor, like in that it should be about the individual book, but it's kind of impossible not to think about these things, or wonder if
Yeah.
that's like lingering in the back of the judge's mind as they're making their ultimate decision. But yeah, I'm sure when they're having their final meeting about this, they'll be having a lot of the same discussions and going backwards and forwards between these books, which are quite different in a lot of ways, but then also like, you know, part of the reason why I love reading, you know, probably shortlists like this, and especially going back now and reading bits of each of them and seeing like thematic links between them, or how they differently handle similar subject matter, I just think is so interesting and fun. And and so, but
who knows?
we'll win. Yeah, but if I had to, if you, you know, sat me down and it was like you must pick one.
I have a gun in my bag, Eric.
I probably would still pick Flesh. I think and I know. Dua Lipa agrees. So, now the font of all literary comes from Dua Lipa.
I would love it if she sort of sweeps in at the end. It's like, sorry, the ultimate decision is down to me.
I've overruled the judge's decision. I say it's Szalay.
Yeah.
The winner.
I would be very happy to see it win. I mean, obviously, it's both of our favourite. But I think it would be such a fun, bold choice.
Yeah, quite a different book from other recent winners too.
Yeah, we shall see.
Yeah,
a few weeks.
November 10th, we will find out who actually wins. But we'd love to hear from everyone. What do you think? What is your wish list? What are you hoping will win, and what do you actually think will win? And let us know if you agree or disagree with any of the comments that we've made here. If you want to politely disagree with us,
Bob, you are wrong about everything.
would love to hear your perspective on all of this as well.
Yeah,
and we will see very soon. But it's been a fun year. I would say overall, like this is like a good shortlist. I'm not sure I would call it like the great or like the best shortlist of recent years. Like I said, like there with all these books, there are aspects of them I can pick out and say like, oh, I don't think that worked quite as well as the author intended, and just the whole thing of like, oh, a sea scraper, like maybe it should have been on the shortlist. But I don't know. What do you think? What is your sense of all as a prize year compared to other Booker Prize years?
It's not 2005, which lives in my heart. It's a very good year. No, I think it's always a weird one with this, I guess, because I think when the long list went to a short list, I remember being like, hang on, what? And I was really like, I couldn't get my head around it. And then I sat with it for a couple of days and I thought, actually, 4 of the books on this I really love. Another book I think is really strong, and there's one that I'm not as keen on. And actually, that's not bad odds. Those are not bad odds. So actually, I think with a moment sort of stepped away, I think putting aside dear beloved Sea Scraper, I think I was actually, it's pretty strong. I think the fact that we're not sort of talking about one runaway winner in this, or, one book that just is heads and shoulders above everything else, I think is testament to that these are. So I think, it's a decent shortlist. There have been some shortlists where I've been a bit more, particularly going back and reading old shortlists, where some of the shortlists I've been sort of lukewarm about 3 or 4 of them. And that feels a lot tougher, where you only really have 1 or 2 that you're gunning for. Whereas here, I think actually, maybe with the exception of The Rest of Our Lives, I'd be really happy to see any of these win. And that's good. Like that's quite healthy, I think.
Yeah. Now, saying all that, watch The Rest of Our Lives is going to win.
just despite us. No, I think it's sort of,
I know lots of readers love it, so we'll probably be happy with that choice too. We will see very soon.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining me, Bob.
Thank you.
It's been a really lovely chat, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else thinks and seeing what the winner is very soon.
Yes.
But we will both, I'm sure, be speaking to you again very soon in videos. But thank you for watching us having this discussion.
Thank you.
And have a lovely day.
Take care. Bye-bye.